I love creating geometric shapes and animations. Most of my dailies reflects this. Although I haven't posted much in the way of dailies on Instagram recently, I still keep my hand in. Creating and working out geometric shapes are a great way to combat a creative block. This is my main reason for dailies, using them to learn new techniques and to try something out. Learning the different tools within Cinema 4D can be daunting at times, but creating dailies alleviates this and are fun to make. I was asked how I made one of my Instagram posts, and there are many ways to achieve this look. The technique I'm going to show you is really simple, and you can create some really complex looking animations by using the Mograph tools and fields. The possibilities are endless. Once you learn how to make the base animation, you can just let your creativity flow. I'll show you my favourite effectors and how I use these to create some awesome animations. Hi, it's Beefy and welcome to my channel. If you haven't been here before, then this is where I post tutorials and breakdowns of my projects. If you're into design, 3D modeling, motion graphics, Cinema 4D, X particles and the like, then you're on the right place. So why not start by subscribing today? It will really help the algorithm find this channel and help me make more content. And if you're feeling really adventurous, then tinkle that bell so you don't miss a thing. Okay, I'm in Cinema 4D here and I'm using Cinema 4D S24. I haven't upgraded to 25 yet. I've downloaded it, but I haven't migrated over yet. But this is the version I'm using. And for the most part of the tutorial, you should be able to use any version of Cinema 4D. And it will come to a point when I'm going to be explaining how to use fields with effectors, and that's the point where you won't be able to follow along. So if you've got like Cinema 4D 19 and prior, then you should be able to follow along and get some pretty awesome animations as it is. But if you haven't got R20 to R25, then you won't be able to follow along with the fields. And saying that, I'm going to crack on here, and this is my project. I've got a timeline with 0 to 120 frames. So it's 121 frames. I'm going to be creating a 4-second loop, and my frames per second is 30, and that's all you need to know. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the cylinder, and this is going to be the base for our animation here. And at the moment I've got radius 50, height 200, and my height segments are 4 and rotation segments are 16. So I'm going to make some changes here. I'm going to be using figures that I've already used, and I know they'll work for me, but your cylinder can be any configuration. So I'm just going to change the radius to 100, and I'm going to change the height to 1100, and my height segments I'm going to change to 20, and my rotation segments I'm going to change to 3. And if I just pull out here, we now have our very own giant Toblerone, which is, it's coming up to Christmas, you know, giant Toblerones, yummy. Anyway, so what do I want to do now? Well, what I want to do is I want to twist this Toblerone, and I also want to bend it. And to do that, I'm going to use Deformers. So I'm just going to come into the Deformers tab here. So I'm going to make sure that cylinder is selected. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to apply a twist. And this makes the twist a child of the cylinder, and also it's fit to parent. So this bounding box is very tight around our Toblerone here. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to bring in the bend. So I'm just going to come to the same drop down tab, and I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to apply the bend. Okay, so far so good. So the bend is the child of the cylinder as well. And what I want to do is I want to make the top here and the bottom here, I want to make these join. So I'm just going to make sure my bend is selected, and I'm going to change the strength to 360. And it's moved everything down here. So I'm going to just come up here so we can see what we're doing. Okay, and also with the twist here, I want to twist the geometry so it folds inside out. So I want to make some twists so that it joins here, but we have like a like a Mobius ring or of sorts and stuff and that. So anyway, so I'm going to change the angle here, and as I change the angle, something's not quite right, and the reason being is that the order of operations in the hierarchy of the cylinder is the wrong way round. So I want to twist first before I bend. Sounds like a dance, but anyway, so I'm just going to put this back to 0, and I'm just going to take the twist and pop it between the cylinder and the bend, and I'm just going to now twist the ring, and you can see now that this is working the way we want it. Okay, so I'm going to put this back to 0 because we don't need to play with that yet. And also what I want to do is I want to rotate the cylinder, and if I rotate the cylinder now, so I want to rotate the cylinder on the rotation H. If I do that, you can see that the whole of the hierarchy is twisting around, and we don't want that to happen. We want the cylinder to turn while it's been twisted and bent. Okay, that sounds a little bit ominous. Okay, so the way I'm going to do that is that we don't need to have the deformers as a child of the cylinder. We can actually place everything into a null. So I'm just going to create a null, and I'm going to call this null cylinder. Okay, and I'm going to drop everything into that null. So with a deformer, you can have everything in the hierarchy of a null, and if you place the deformers above the object that you want to affect, then these will work the same way as having them as a child of the object. So now if I select my cylinder and I spin the rotation on the H, you can see now that this is now spinning now. So we can now keyframe this, and actually that's what I'm going to do now. I'm just going to keyframe this. So I'm just going to set a keyframe for the 0 frame and come to 120, and I'm going to set this to 360. Okay, so now this should spin round, and that's great. But the problem is that our keyframes aren't linear, and I want this to be a constant rate. So if I just come to the H here, right click, come to animation, if I come to show F curve, we got our F curve here. So I want to, if I click this black graph symbol here, that's going to show all the keyframes. So I've got the 0 keyframe at 120 frames, and I'm just going to select these, and I'm just going to make these linear. So I come to this tab here, click that, everything's linear. So now I have a constant rate, and everything's working the way we want it to. Okay, what do I want to do now? Well, what I want to do is I want to put the cylinder in a subdivision surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that my cylinder is selected, and I'm going to click the subdivision surface. So I want to increase the polygons without having to put too many polygons on the cylinder. So we're going to have a little bit more control over this. And so I'm just going to hold down Alt and click, and now we have this weird looking O here, and we got a problem here. And what the problem is, if I just come in here, is that I still have my caps on. And so if I come to the cylinder here and come to the caps tab, I still have caps selected. So this means that these aren't going to join. The top end and the bottom end aren't going to join very smoothly. So what I need to do is switch off the caps. So I'm just going to switch that off. And it looks like we've got a perfect join there, but we haven't. So if I get just come here and just come right in here, you can see that we have this line here. And the way to get rid of that is we need to join these together, and the way we're going to join them is through a connect object. So I'm just going to take the cylinder null here. I'm just going to close that for the moment, and I'm going to hold down Alt, and if I come down to, if I find the connect object, I'm just going to hold Alt and click the connect object, and that's going to make that a parent of the cylinder. And you probably missed that, so I'm going to turn off the connect, and you can see that that's where the join is. If I just turn the connect on, it disappears, and that's exactly what we want. So now we can keep everything procedural, so we don't need to turn the cylinder into a live object and join these two ends. We can now just keep this procedural, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. So okay, right, so the next thing I want to do is I want to come to the subdivision surface. So this is way too smooth for me. So before I do anything, I'm just going to come to the cylinder, and I'm just going to, okay, so I've got 3 segments there. So I want to twist this a little bit more. So to twist this, I have to make sure I've got the right degree. So the easy way to remember this is that a circle has 360 degrees. We know that we have 3 sides to our object. So if I divide 360 by 3, that gives us 120. And that's going to twist this perfectly for us. And if I times that by 2, then we're going to twist again. And we know that now this is going to be perfect. If you've got like 5 sides, then you need to divide 360 by 5, which will give you 72. So you have to do multiples of 72. 4 sides is going to be 90, so that's going to be multiples of 90. And if you got 7 sides, that's where things start getting weird. 7 sides, you're going to have, I think it's 51 points something, whatever it is, and stuff in there. So you can have 7 sides, but you're going to have to get your calculator out basically. So anyway, so I've got this twist going on here. So I've got 240 on my angle, and this is looking really smooth. I mean, it's not bad. I mean, it depends if you want to build something like this, it's up to you, but we can make this a little bit more exciting. So if I come to the subdivision surface, and in the type we have all the algorithms for subdivision. So the Catmull-Clark algorithms are the guys from Pixar, and this is the algorithm that they created back in 1970 something, I can't remember now. So the subdiv loop is, I'm not too sure where that algorithm came from, but it's pretty much the same as the Catmull-Clark. But the open subdiv type I want to use is open subdiv bilinear. So what I want to do is I want to keep my edges sharp, and I want to increase my polygons. So if I just click this, there we go. So we got our nice sharp edges there, and if I just put my ground shading lines on, we got our lovely polygons there, which is pretty cool. Okay, so that's exactly what I want. So if we come to the subdivision surface here, and I just can increase my subdivisions in my viewport, and I can increase my subdivisions in my render. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward there. So when we press play, we've got our object, it's spinning around, and that's looking pretty good to me. Okay, so we're kind of nearly there. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating an animation that I was asked a question about. So I'm just going to get this out of the way first. This will be on the way of showing you how to use Mograph to create really cool animations and stuff and that. So what I want to do, I want to make sure my cylinder is rotation segments 3, and I'm going to come to the twist here, and I'm going to make sure that the angle is 1440, and you get this really pretty twist here. And I'm just going to hide the twist from the viewport here, and I'm going to hide the bend from the viewport. We don't need to see these. Okay, so now I've got my animation, and it's not looking great. It's kind of like, looks like it's just spinning on the Z-axis. and that's not what we want to do. So I'm going to put this ground shading back, and so what I want to do is I want to create a cloner object. So I'm going to create a cloner object, and I'm going to move this underneath the connect object. So what I want to do, I want to clone some geometry to the whole of this hierarchy here. So I'm going to be placing geometry on this object here. Okay, so I'm just going to change the connect to cylinder, just so that we know exactly what that is and we can have this closed for the moment. Okay, so what I want to do is I want all the animation to be happening on the cylinder first before I clone onto the cylinder. Okay, if that makes sense. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a capsule, and this capsule I'm going to be using numbers that I've used before. So the radius is 5 and the height is 150. I'm just going to keep everything else as default, and I'm just going to drop this capsule into the cloner, and in this cloner I'm going to come to the mode, and I want to change this to object, as if you didn't know that already. And the instance mode I'm just going to change to render instance, just so that we can deal with a lot of clones here. And I'm going to take the connect object, the cylinder connect object, and I'm going to place that into the object field, and there we have our clones all cloning onto the object here. So distribution surface, that's pretty lame. It's just gonna you know, you just increase the number there. It's pretty lame. You have no real control over these. The distribution types that I like are vertex. So we get this nice pattern going on here, and everything's twirling in and spinning around, and that's looking pretty cool. And the other one I like to play with is polygon center, and this gives us a little bit more defined on the edges here. And again, this like spinning around, turning inside out, looking great, liking that already. But the mode that I like is edge. So I'm just going to select edge, and now we've got this lovely, wonderful geometric pattern going on here, and that's looking great. So I haven't lined the camera up yet, so this is looking a bit lame, but I'm going to do something first before I line the camera up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the cloner, and I'm going to come to the transform, and I'm going to increase the height on the Y, and that's looking great. So what I want to do is, now that I've made this center smaller, I can now line a camera up easily. So I'm going to create a camera, and this camera I'm going to center out the coordinates. So this is now on 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and scale is 1. So I want to move this down to the front here. So I'm just going to come to the front view, and I'm just going to move this camera down into place, kind of, and just drop that in there. I'm going to come right in here, and I'm going to just enable snapping. I was already on enable snap, and I've got my grid work plane snap, which is exactly what I want there. So I'm just going to come in a little bit now. So I want to put it around this point here. So if I just bring this down, and it's snapped. Just make sure it's snapped to the right spot, which is looking pretty good there. So what I'm going to do is I want to come out. What I want to do first before I position the camera is that I want to place a null here in the center. So I'm just going to create a null, and I'm going to call this target. This target is going to be a reference point. So if I want the camera to be pointed at it, or I want to line something up like a spherical field or something like that, then I can use this as a reference. So I'm just going to keep this as it is, but I'm going to bring it as a child of the camera, and then I'm going to press reset transform, and now that's centered into the middle of our animation there, which is exactly what I want. So I'm just going to pull this out. So I'm just going to come into the camera here, and I want to make this, so I just want to change the focal length. And I mean, 36 is a pretty good focal length. You can get some nice wide, kind of wideish angle out of that and stuff and that. But I like to, with this animation, I like to keep it a little bit more compressed. So I'm just going to use portrait 80mm, and I'm going to come to the top view here, and I'm going to bring our camera back so our focal length is now in line with our animation there, which is pretty cool. So if I just turn this on and come to perspective view there, we now have that centered onto our animation. I need to pull this back a little bit more. So I'm just going to I'm just going to open all views so I can see what's going on here. And I'm just going to bring the camera back just so that this fits in our composition here. There you go. So let's just come back to our perspective view there. So this is our animation, and so this is the animation I was asked a question about, and I forget who asked me now, but hopefully this has helped you. And you should be able to make some pretty awesome variations of this. So once you've learned how to make this base animation, you can just change some parameters, which I'm going to be showing you in the next stage. Okay, so that's the basis for our animation. So now we can start playing around with parameters to get a completely different look. So the first place I like to start is actually come into the cylinder. So the cylinder, you can like change the radius, height segments, you can change them, but I like to change them using the subdivision surface. And you can also change how many rotational segments you're going to have. So we can make our tube a pentagonal, and now we can come into the twist, and we can actually change how many twists that we got. So I like to keep these as a multiple of 2 because I do like the symmetry either side. But you can actually, if I come down to 72 here, so if I come down the angle, say 72, which is the base angle, times 7, we now have this completely different look here, which is looking pretty smart. I like that. So there's many things you can do with this. The things that I like doing is actually coming into the cloner here and actually applying an effector. So if I come to this drop down menu here and I just apply a formula, we're going to get this completely different look here, and it looks kind of messy with the tubes here. So I'm just going to take the capture out of here, and I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to make a cube, and I'm going to drop this cube into the cloner, and that's looking kind of like a bit humongous there. So if I come down to the parameters of the cube, if I just select the size there, that's going to select all of these, and now I can just change one parameter, say 10, hold control and enter, then I can change all the parameters all together at one go. Just a little tip there. So with the fillets, I can just put the fillet up here. I'm going to say if we can make it like 5, that should make these circular, and put some more divisions on here just to make them smooth. And that's looking pretty cool there. And now with the formula effector, I can just come in, I can just change the formula if I want to, but I'm just going to keep this as it is. You can actually change the parameter here. I'm going to say like 180, and then that's going to give you a completely different look there. So I'm just going to go back to 360 there. And you can also change the project time. So my project's 120 and stuff, so the project time is 1. If I divide this by 2, then that should loop still, and that will give us, this will make this a lot slower in the animation, which is pretty cool. If you want it even slower, then just divide this by 2 and you got like 0.25, and that's even slower, which is pretty cool. So you have a lot of control with the formula effector. So you can use pretty much any effector. You can use a sound effector. You can have these bouncing to the beat of the music. It's up to you what you want to do. So just play around with your effectors there. I'm not going to iterate too much on the effectors. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to explain the fields. If you've got like R20 to R25, you should be able to follow along in this part. Unfortunately, fields didn't come in until R20, so if you've got R19 and prior, then you won't be able to follow along, but you should be able to get some similar looking stuff using the regular effectors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tidy this up a little bit in here. So I'm just going to say, just create a null, and I'm going to call this archive. And I'm just going to drop this capsule into the archive. And I'm also going to create another null, and I'm going to call this scene objects. And I'm going to just drop the camera in here. We don't need to see these in the hierarchy here. And just going to drop the target into scene objects as well for the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the cloner, and I'm going to create a plane effector. So I'm just going to come down to the drop down here and just choose a plane effector. So now this is now in our effectors as normal, and I'm just going to bring the plane effector all the way down here. Actually, what I'm going to do first, I'm going to take the plane effector, I'm going to drop it under the target. So this is our reference object that we made, and I'm going to press reset transform, and now this is in the position here in the middle. Makes things a lot easier. So now when I add some fall off to the plane effector, it's going to be bang smack in the middle here. It just saves changing coordinates of your spherical fields or linear fields or whatever you're using. Okay, so in the parameter here, I have the position. So everything's jumped up by 100 there. So what I can do is come into the cloner, and I can change the position and the transform, because we don't really need to use that now. So we can just change everything in the plane effector. So now this is back to how we had it before. And now what we can do is I'm just going to change the scale, and I'm going to make this uniform, and I'm going to make this a -1. And everything disappears now. So what I can do is just come into the fall off, and I can create a spherical field. And now we have this lovely looking loop here. That's looking pretty cool. And now we can just play around with our spherical fields. So I can make the size of this, I'm going to change this up to like 300. And I'm just going to turn the color off in the field here, because I don't want to be changing colors. It's really distracting. And now we have this lovely animation where it's growing, shrinking and growing in the middle here, and as it's spinning around. So we can actually come into the remapping, and we can make some more adjustments here. So I'm going to invert this. So now all the shrinking and growing is on the outside, and we can just play with the contour now. So I want to make this a curve, and now that we have a curve, we have a little bit more variation there. And now I can just play with the spline offset, and that's going to give us a completely different look. So that's kind of looking like a lace table mat there, which is pretty cool. These are the kind of things my mum used to crochet when I was a kid. And let's put this back to, let's put this back to 0 for the moment, because I want to show you something else. So in the spline here, we can actually put a preset. So I'm going to do a spline preset. I'm going to make this a sine. And this is going to give us a completely different look here. And that's looking pretty smart there. And now we can play with the offset again and get some really nice action there. So you can actually keyframe the offset if you want to. But the other thing that we can do with this is that we've got a spline animation speed, and we can actually animate this spline. So it says 0 frames at the moment, so there's no animation happening. So I can actually say, okay, so I want to animate this, but I want to loop every 60 frames. So I'm going to put 60 in here. And now this is now going to animate. And you get some really wonderful looking animation here. And that's really kind of hypnotic. That I like that. And the other thing you can do is, let's just put this back to 0. Because we're using fields and stuff and that, we can actually now layer these on top. So I can create a formula field and just layer that on top, and so we get this completely different looking animation here. And what I want to do is I want to add this to the animation that we have already. So we have this nice looking looping animation here, which is really nice. And this is all working with the parameters in the plane effector here. So this is like Y is 100, and our scale is going from -1 to 1 there. So that's looking pretty cool there. The other thing you can do, what else can you do with this? Actually, I want to make the Z just have the particles coming out on the Z there. So we now have this lovely looking animation here. So you get the, hopefully you get the point here, is that this using fields can save you so much more time. Instead of like layering on effectors in the cloner, you can actually just use fields in the plane fall off, which is pretty cool. So this is looking really, really nice there. I like that. And you can just like come back into the fall off here. If we come to the formula fields and come to the remapping, we can actually change the contour mode to curve and this one as well. And then you can just play with the offset. So what's happening here is that this is going to grow and then start back at the beginning again. So if you just change this to sine again, so come to the presets and change that to sine, then now we have this looping animation here, and this is looking pretty cool. It's looking really, really erratic there. And we can just change the spline offset, and we get this nice looking flowers growing here, which is really, really cool. So I think you get the point, and the message that I'm saying here is just like play around with your fields and your plane fall off, and just play around with the blending. So you can actually change this to multiply, and then this is going to give us a really completely different look. So it's a good way of practicing with your effectors and practicing with your fields and actually learning the blending and seeing what you're going to get. But I like to have this as add. So this is adding onto the top of the spherical field here, and we get some nice tendrils coming out here, and that's looking pretty smart. Okay, so the last thing I want to mention is that I want to make this a 4-second loop, and at the moment I've got 0 to 120 frames on my timeline. And if I come to frame 0 and then I come to frame 120, you can see that these are exactly the same frame. So I don't need to render out this last frame, and so what I need to do is just change my preview range to 0 to 119, and then I come to my output here, and if I render out my preview range, which is 0 to 119, then I'm going to get a seamless loop when I bring it into my compositing software. So I'm going to leave this tutorial here, and hopefully that you've learned something from this, and I shall be back with you in the next video. Okay, so thanks for watching. I really hope what I've shown you today has helped you in any way and you learned something useful from this. I would love to see what you've made using this technique, so tag me in Instagram at almostdailyrender, and don't forget to like, subscribe and jingle the bell so you don't miss a thing. And as always, any questions, comments, then please leave them below. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next video.